When we think about someone who is quiet, we often imagine a calm, peaceful person who tends to keep to themselves. They may come across as shy, introverted, or just someone who prefers to observe rather than participate in loud, boisterous conversations. It's easy to assume that because they don't speak much, they are harmless, unassuming, or that their anger is less intense. But that's not always the case. In fact, some quiet people can be downright brutal when they get angry, though it might not be in the way you expect. The truth is, a quiet person's anger can be much more intense and unsettling than the fiery outbursts of someone who is more outspoken. Why? Because their anger is often carefully controlled, and when it finally erupts, it can feel like an explosion. And the worst part? It usually comes from a place of being pushed to the limit, which makes it all the more powerful. Quiet people tend to bottle things up. They're not ones to scream, yell, or let their emotions spill out at the slightest provocation. They're the kind of people who take a lot before they get angry. They observe, process, and reflect on what's going on around them. They may hold on to frustration for a long time before they feel the need to address it. But when they do, it's usually because they've been pushed too far, way too far. This calm demeanor may give people around them the impression that they can be easily ignored or taken advantage of, but that's a dangerous assumption to make. Quiet people don't express their anger in the same way as more vocal individuals, but that doesn't mean they don't experience it. In fact, when they do get angry, their anger can be much more intense, often because it has been building for so long. When a quiet person's anger comes to the surface, it might not be with the loud, attention-grabbing shouting you might expect. Instead, it could be more subtle, calculated, and chilling. They may not raise their voice, but the way they speak could be cold, sharp, and cutting. A few well-placed words from a quiet person can leave you feeling like you've been stabbed in the chest, metaphorically, of course. The silence, the calmness, the steady tone, it all makes the anger feel like a more calculated attack. One of the reasons why quiet people can get so brutal when they're angry is because they've had time to think about it. They're not acting impulsively. While others may lash out without thinking, quiet people tend to analyze the situation from every angle, building up a quiet storm of resentment in their minds. They might take days, weeks, or even months before they finally let you know how they feel. This slow burn can make their anger feel even more intense because by the time it comes out, it's been stewing for so long. And when they do finally get angry, it can feel like an avalanche of emotion. They've been carrying it for so long. And when it spills over, it can be overwhelming. The silence they usually maintain might suddenly be replaced by a powerful intensity, like a calm before the storm. You won't necessarily see it coming. They might still seem composed, but the words they choose, the tone they use, and the body language they project will all be telling you something different. You'll know something is wrong, but it'll be hard to pinpoint exactly what. Sometimes, a quiet person's anger is not about confrontation, but about withdrawal. They may become distant, shutting people out emotionally. Instead of shouting, they may decide to give you the cold shoulder or refuse to engage with you at all. This can be even more painful than a verbal confrontation because it feels like they've completely closed themselves off from you. In a way, it's a form of punishment, and it's one that can leave you feeling like you're walking on eggshells around them, unsure of how to fix things. Their silence can feel like a form of rejection that cuts deeper than any harsh words. But what makes a quiet person's anger so brutal is that they're not necessarily seeking revenge. They don't lash out because they want to make you feel bad or to hurt you. For them, the act of getting angry might be a form of self-preservation. It's their way of setting boundaries, of drawing a line in the sand and saying, "I've had enough." But that doesn't mean they won't hurt you in the process. It's also important to note that a quiet person's anger is not always about the situation at hand. Often, their anger is a culmination of many smaller, more insignificant things that have been building up over time. Perhaps it's the constant microaggressions, the little ways they've been dismissed, ignored, or belittled. Or maybe it's the way their feelings have been invalidated over and over again. These things might seem small in the moment, but to a quiet person, they can be deeply hurtful. And when they finally express their anger, it can feel like all of these little wounds are being aired out at once, making their anger feel even more intense. The key to understanding a quiet person's anger is recognizing that it's not just about what's happening right now, it's about everything that led up to this moment. They may be angry not just because of one isolated incident, but because they've been bottling up their feelings for so long that they've reached a breaking point. The way they express their anger might not make sense to others, but it's often the only way they know how to cope with years of suppressed emotions. One of the most powerful things about a quiet person's anger is that they don't need to shout or scream to make their point. In fact, they may be even more effective in communicating their anger without saying a word. Their body language, their eyes, their posture, they all convey their feelings with an intensity that words sometimes can't capture. It's the kind of anger that lingers, the kind that makes you feel unsettled long after the interaction is over. So, how brutal can a quiet person get when they're angry? In a way, their anger is far more dangerous than the more obvious outward expressions of anger. It's quiet, it's calculated, and it's often accompanied by a chilling sense of resolve. They may not yell, but they can tear you apart with a single glance, a sharp word, or a sudden withdrawal of all warmth and affection. It's a reminder that just because someone is quiet doesn't mean they're incapable of intense emotions. In fact, their silence might just be hiding a storm waiting to be unleashed. If you ever find yourself on the receiving end of a quiet person's anger, know that it's not to be taken lightly. Respect their boundaries. Understand that their anger is often the result of long-term emotional buildup, and be mindful of how your actions and words may affect them. A quiet person may not always speak their mind, but when they do, it's usually because they've been pushed to the edge. And when that happens, their anger can be more brutal than you ever imagined.